Hey, what is up, everybody? We've got a really great Facebook Live audio room discussion that we're going to be doing today. I've got a couple of special guests with me, the one and only Quinn Nelson, along with Rob Tait. Hey, it looks like Quinn's here, Rob's here. If you guys aren't familiar already, Quinn Nelson is the host of Snazzy Labs over on YouTube. It's boy, Quinn, I actually don't know how I would describe your channel. To be perfectly honest with you, you kind of touch everything. Um, I think your reputation started as more of like a Mac guy, but now you do Mac, you do PC, you do gaming, you do home automation, and you've got some very strong opinions. I mean, automotive, you dabble in basically everything. Did I miss something?
No, I think, well, probably, but if it's got a chip in it, we'll talk about it.
That's awesome. I love it. And then Rob, I actually only met very recently because the inspiration for this discussion today was that I'm moving into a new home. It was built in the mid 1990s and it has, well, let's just put it this way. The technology that was built into the house was cutting edge for the time, but these days, an intercom in your kitchen doesn't exactly pass for smart home. And I kind of I put out feelers and I got recommendations from a ton of our viewers for who are the people who really know their shiz when it comes to home automation. And Rob was one of the names that came up absolutely repeatedly. And he has been an amazing resource for me, even just figuring out some of the basic stuff. So Rob, how long have you been doing the home automation game? And just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been into the home automation game for about, I don't know, 5 years or so. It's actually a really weird story. I broke my back like on the very first day. So I was a high school teacher for 15 years. And I broke my back on the very first day of the summer. So I couldn't do anything except for lay around. And so I spent that entire summer basically learning home automation stuff. I had already been, into code, but I just went real deep into it. And ever since, just it's been a hobby of mine.
Now, I'm so glad you kicked us off with that because one of the biggest challenges for me getting into this is you talk about, being like a software guy or, Quinn, my understanding is you were more of a computers guy before you got into the home automation scene. I'm the same way. And I think I speak for a lot of people when I say that even if you would describe yourself as tech savvy, home automation is a completely different game. I mean, not only do you have to have a basic understanding of more megahertz makes it go faster, or which frequencies are more likely to transmit over a longer range, like that kind of basic techie stuff, but you've got to dabble in code. You've got to dabble in home improvement. You've got to be like, hey, they always say if she doesn't find you handsome, she should at least find you handy. With home automation, you got to be crazy, crazy handy to get into this stuff. And as soon as I started reading up on it, I realized everything I learned taught me five more things that I didn't know. So Quinn, how did you start out in home automation?
Well, pretty simply, and then it kind of unraveled. I bought a house back at the end of last year, and I had heard a lot of good, but mostly bad things about the smart home. I had seen the articles about people buying hardware and then the company being purchased and stuff would no longer work, and just that whole mess of automation and how stuff really didn't work that well together. And so I thought, well, how about I try and make a smart home that doesn't suck? I'm not going to purposely make everything smart if it doesn't have to be, but only make the stuff smart that will be actually useful, that I can actually continue to use as a non-smart device, and then go from there. And I noticed much the same thing, that, well, it's not yet as simple as just going to the store, buying some hardware, plugging it in, and being done. You can really get down a rabbit hole. And I've tried to restrain myself because I have a wife who I would like to stay married to. Yeah, I've spent a lot of time on stuff, and I've finally come to a solution that I think works really well. But it's not for the faint of heart, shall we say?
So
Do you
I
guys
think that
know? Do you guys know who Mitch Hedberg is?
I've never
No.
So Mitch Hedberg is a comedian, and he's got this joke. He's like a shtick comedian, but he's got this joke that he says that he loves escalators because an escalator can never break; it can only become stairs. And so like that's how I feel like smart home stuff should be. Like, okay, you've got this extra stuff that it can do, but if it breaks, it should still perform all of its basic tasks. And like that's one of those huge hurdles that smart home products have to jump over. And that is, you know, if the person doesn't want to use it as smart, they should be able to maintain all the functionality that it had before.
100%. You know what? That
Oh
was one
yeah.
of the things, like I'm going to admit to you guys, the only reason I've gotten into it lately is because we're moving into this new place. We have to tear out a bunch of the walls anyway because we've got this, shoot, I forget what it's made of, but it's an awful kind of water piping in the walls that you don't want. What's that material? Water.
Galvanized steel or no? Your
Lead?
house is new.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I bet my wife would remember what it is. But the point is, we have to tear a bunch of the walls open anyway. And I'm kind of sitting here going, well, shoot, if I don't do it now, then I'm going to miss the opportunity. So previously, I had always kind of been of the mind, is it really that much work to get up and, flip on a light switch or flip off a light switch? And again, I'm going to be kind of outing myself as a bit of a technophobe in a certain sense here, but I don't have a single, Amazon Alexa device in my home. I don't own a Google Home. I actually don't even own a single smart speaker or anything like that. Because I feel like I already have my phone on me listening to everything I'm saying. You have a conversation with your cousin about drones or whatever, and all of a sudden your ads are full of drones. It's like, is this really a coincidence? And it felt like it just kind of wasn't worth it to me. But now that I'm digging into it, it's so much more exciting than just a light switch that you don't have to go up and flip. With that said, I love that you brought that up, Rob, because one of the things that I did at my new house or at my old house was I got myself one of those Lutron Caseta. I don't know what the pronunciation's supposed to be, but
Yep.
one of those Lutron smart switches. And it was amazing how quickly it worked. It was a kit. It came with their little hub, and the whole thing just picked up automatically. It was so cool. And even with my Home Assistant container. So for those of you who are not familiar, Home Assistant is a software that you can run on a computer or on a server or even on a Raspberry Pi that takes non-natively compatible smart home ecosystems and makes them work together. And so it picked it up like instantly. But you know what I hated about it? The smartness was great, but the actual buttons on it, they sucked. It was really hard to tell when I was reaching around the corner in the dark, where the on button is, where the off button is, and they were so close to the up and down dimmer arrows that I hated it as a normal light switch. And the reality of it is 95% of the time, that was how I was going to use it. So I just took it out. I was like, forget it. I don't care about this anymore. So with you guys, I mean, with that in mind, that the last thing you want is for your smart home devices to make your regular normal life worse. How do you decide what to automate and what's a step too far?
Yeah. So, well, with me, I actually love the Caseta switches, Linus. So you back
Well, we can
off.
help the
Just
case.
kidding. But I kind of had three guiding principles when I set up my house. The first thing, as we've kind of already touched on, is that all smart devices, they have to be controllable non-smartly. We've all
Yeah.
seen, people that go out and buy Hue lights, for example, and they put them in their room and they turn them on and off with their phone or with their Alexa devices. And then a visitor comes over, flips their light switch, and then nothing works. And it's just a disaster, right? So
Yep.
they must be controllable non-smartly, either by a remote or on-device button, no quote unquote high-end tech. The second thing I cared about was that all devices have to integrate into a singular centralized app with a singular voice assistant for control, so that I wasn't, entering this app and that app and what was that supposed to work with again, and that. And then the third thing was that automation, which is not just manual switching on and off of stuff, but making them work and setting up workflows where when this happens, that can't get in the way. Because smart home stuff is awesome when it works, and it is horrible when it doesn't. When you just want something basic to happen that you used to be able to do just walking over to a light switch or turning, the sink on, and now it's all messed up, you wish you never did anything. And so those were kind of the three important things I was very conscientious of.
I think one thing that's really important for smart homes, and when people talk about smart homes, they're always thinking about light switches and plugs, and like that's a thing that smart homes do. But I think it's so much more than that, and it can be so much more than that. Like one of the main things that I focus on is things that will things that will make your life better that you should be doing but you don't do, right? So like it could be something stupid like opening the blinds in a room, right? So you go into a room and it's got the blinds down, you sit down, whatever. You'd feel better if you let it in a little sunlight and weren't acting like you were living in a cave. But the idea of getting up and going over and opening it, yeah, it seems simple, but you don't do it. So, having it be automated where, oh, it's this amount of light outside and it's this time of day, I'm going to go open the blinds. Or like in our bedroom, we have a routine that we can just say, let there be light, and it opens the curtains and opens the blinds in the morning.
That's
Right.
cute.
And so that way, if I want to sleep in or whatever, that's great. But if I want to lay in bed and let the sunlight in and kind of adjust to it, then I can do that as well.
All right. Now, you say that switches and lights, and I mean, I think blinds to an extent are the ones that everyone thinks of. But I mean, the topic today is the future of home automation. So I want you guys to give a little bit of thought to something that you've automated that you don't think people would think of, or something that you want to automate that you don't think people would think of. And I'm going to kick it off because I happen to have an example in my head already. In our recent video where we were trying out like motion sensors as you're moving around the house, one of the things I would like to achieve is some manner of presence awareness in the house. And motion controls might be the answer. They might not be the answer. I mean, I've seen all kinds of really sophisticated stuff like infrared cameras. So they're actually heat aware. So they'll go, oh yeah, that's a large heat source. It's a human body. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to run the AC in this room because clearly there's actually somebody in here. For me, power savings is a big part of what I'm after. But one of the more kind of future looking ways of using home automation, I think, that we came up with was after that video. One of the devices that we showed off was these little clamps that you can put on your main power panel coming into the building, like into your house. And basically what they do is they tell you the total power usage of everything behind those clamps. So everything through your main electrical panel. And when I clamped them on, I was kind of sitting there going, this is a really cool thing that this manufacturer sent us to show off. And Jake and I tested it. We ran a microwave and we were like, hey, look, the readings go up. But we didn't really come up with something, legitimately useful that we could do with it other than, hey, I could look at this once a month and I could see if I'm using a lot of power. Or, I've heard from people who have said, they think their power company is ripping them off. And that would be a way to see if they are, if you're validating your power consumption on an ongoing basis that way. But one of the things that I came up with after the fact was, as we were working on this place, we want to put in 2 car chargers because I think it's probable that both my wife and I will drive electric cars at some point. We've got a bunch of computers, obviously. We've got air conditioning. We were considering putting in a hot tub. A lot of those use electric power, actually, to heat up the water. And we got to the point where we were sitting here going, holy smokes, even if we do upgrade to a 200 amp service, for our European listeners, that would be 200 amps, 115 volt. So a total of about, what does that work out to? 20,000 watts or 200,000 watts? I can't remember. Probably 20,000 watts would be my guess. No, that might not be right.
Never
Doesn't
do
matter.
math on
Point
screen.
is, yeah, help me out with the math here, guys. Is that 200,000 watts or so?
200 times 100. I'm going to go with 2 with 4 zeros on it.
There we go. 20,000 watts. Perfect. About that. So with all that stuff, the way, I don't know how they do it in your guys' area, but here, when they come and they inspect your house, when you've done a renovation or when you've built a new home, they assign every device, whether it's an electric oven or range or a hot tub or a car charger, they take every device and they assign it kind of like a likelihood of being used score in amps. And what they're trying to achieve is they want to make sure that even if you were running the house, kind of full bore, right? You're not going to cause your mains power coming into the house to heat up. You're not gonna risk a fire. You're not even going to get close to blowing your breaker. So in our area, even if you have a 200 amp service, they're going to make sure that your power budget for it won't exceed about 160 amps. They only let you get up to about 80%. And I get it. That's a great idea. That's really smart. That's a great way to keep people safe. But that doesn't help someone like me who knows, look, I like to think I'm smart enough not to be charging both of my cars while the hot tub's running and the dryer's running and I've got something in the oven. Like there's only one family living here. It's very unlikely to happen. But what I would love to see is for us to get smarter, pardon the pun, about the way that we allocate power to new construction or to home renovations. There's no reason why I couldn't just use a device like that clamp device to just have an automation that will say, for example, I want to say, you know what, if I'm drying my clothes, the last thing I want is for my home assistant to turn off my clothes dryer so that I can charge my car, right? And leave the wet, stanky laundry sitting in the dryer. We don't want that. But hey, maybe charging my car is probably not that essential. Why don't we just turn that off if we get anywhere near our power budget? And that was something that I am totally likely to use that device for in the future, because there's a few things that in order to pass inspection, we're going to have not hooked up at the time of inspection. But that doesn't mean I want to do anything dangerous. And so that's something that is super common in industrial environments, like large factories. They will obviously have things like whole building power monitoring so that they can avoid a situation where they could potentially short a circuit, or, excuse me, short a circuit, blow a circuit, a breaker, or cause a fire. And I'd love to see that technology make its way into the home, especially if it's not that expensive.
I actually think there is something like that right now. It's called, I was watching a video on it from Undecided with Matt Farrell. And basically, like, you normally have like a panel that would have all of your essential services on it. If you had solar, or a battery backup, so that, for instance, if you had a power wall, you wouldn't be able to charge all the things in your home, or run all the things in your home. So you would have like an essential services panel, but then you've got to rip out your old panel and make sure that you have all of these essential services on a separate panel that you would then run with your power wall. But there is a type of panel, which I am blanking on the name right now, I'll find it in a second, that does it
Smart
smartly.
panel.
It's got what would you say?
I said smart panel.
Yeah. But it's got breakers behind the breakers, so like smart breakers behind your normal breakers, and it's called span. It's called span, and those normal breakers are just, you're typical on the front, so you don't lose any functionality. You can still cut off the actual breaker, but then behind them there's essentially like a big contactor or relay, so that you can put your house into low power mode, or in your case you could cut off the Tesla charger if you needed to. Like that it exists. It's super expensive right now, so maybe not viable for most people, but it's one of those things that's out there. If we're talking about the future of smart homes, maybe new homes that get built have that sort of power option on them. I also know that the very first couple of power meters, that's essentially what they were used for. I actually have 3 of them on my house, of those power meters, because I did a video on them a while back. But the original use was to calculate how much power a house generally uses, so that you could get the correct battery backup or get the correct solar array for your house. So they would just have those, and they would go clamp them on the house, gather a bunch of data, and then say, okay, on average you use this, and so you should get this many solar panels.
That'd be awesome. In my house, I moved into a house that's crazy old. It's 120 something years old. It's mostly brick. The insulation upstairs in the attic sucks. I mean, it is the perfect recipe for a bad electric bill, and oh boy, is it. But one of the frustrating things is that it's been difficult to isolate what zones specifically need the insulation and what are less efficient than others. I've been wondering and hoping that such a thing could exist wherein I could certainly identify what devices on my load center are consuming more power than others. I have an electric car and it charges and I just plug it in and it's great. But at the end of the day, when I look at my electric bill, like, oh man, that's a lot of money this month, but I don't know how much of that's my car and how much is my AC. And did I leave, my hi-fi amplifier on for a week and that's what, that was $10. There's a lot of stuff where we kind of lose
So
track of it, but
there's
even
two
with,
different sort of solutions to that, right?
yeah.
One of them uses sort of like machine learning, and it just clamps onto your mains, and then it looks at like what they call the power signature, and they can figure out like, oh, this was a 40 amp draw from a Tesla, or this was a inductive load from a a fan, right? And so it'll actually go through and identify devices. Right. But then the other option is just a more brute force where instead of putting the CTs, the clamps around your mains, you put them around every single circuit that you have in your house.
Oh,
And so,
wow.
yeah, there's a device called the IoT watt or IOTA watt. And it's that. It's got like, I don't know, 15 or 20 different little headphone jack type things on it. And you can put a CT on every single circuit. And so you can say, oh, well, the bathroom circuit's been drawing more, or the kitchen circuit's been drawing more, and so it's really granular.
Okay, so here's a level 2 to that now. There are specific zones in my house that I suspect are less efficiently insulated than other zones. I wish there was such a thing, and maybe there is, where via electronic damper control on my HVAC system or something that I could identify rooms that are consuming more airflow that need more AC exposure to bring the temperature down or the heat up in the winter, and go, okay, this is the room that's the problem. Because right now, with the way services cost and to get someone to come out and look at my house, I mean, they'll look at it and say, well, yeah, this whole thing needs to be re-insulated. It's a nightmare. And
And
that'll
they're not
run,
wrong, but
yeah, and they're not wrong. But I suspect there are a couple areas in specific that are much worse than others. I just don't know what those are, and I'm not confident that there will be a significant change if and when I'm able to get around to that. So,
okay, that's another one that it just blows me away is not a residential obvious given, like multi-zone ACs for home use, for residential use. They exist, but they cap out at 3 or 4 zones, is my understanding,
mm-hmm.
and they're not elegant. It's not an elegant way to achieve what you're talking about. I mean, I talked to the contractor that's helping us with our reno, and I basically said, okay, look, I right now, because I'm using a mini split system where the cold side of the air conditioner is actually in the room that it cools, and then
Mm-hmm.
there's refrigerant lines running to the outside of the house where the hot side serves multiple cold sides, so it's like a 4-way mini split. Because I have a system like that, I have per room AC and not to mention heat control because it's a heat pump. If I'm spending much more money, it typically costs more to run all the ducting for
Big
a
time.
proper forced air AC or heat pump system. If I'm spending more money, why would I accept anything less than per room heating and cooling control? And he goes, oh, well, you got that. You just need to take the little knobby thing on the vent and close it a little if this room's too hot. And I'm sitting here going, are you kidding me right now? No. That's caveman technology. And so it turns out that, again, in the industrial space, this stuff is commodity already. You can get a smart damper like you're talking about for something like $70, $80 US. And all you have to do then is you have to integrate it through Z-Wave or Zigbee or whatever it is that you happen to be using, and you can control it on a room-by-room basis. Now, because an AC unit has the potential to ice over, if you had, let's say, only a single room calling for air conditioning, the
Yeah.
logic behind it has to be a lot smarter. But it's one of those things where, one of my guys, Jake, was able to put together some reasonably intelligent logic in Home Assistant in an afternoon or so. And I just don't understand why that kind of thing isn't everywhere. Now, let's move on to our kind of next key topic here. When it comes to controlling your devices, voice or phone? What's your go-to?
Voice all day. Who wants to pull out their phone to control something? That's awful. I'd rather touch a button on the wall.
Well, I don't want to pull out my phone, but my big problem is that half the time I try to use voice control for things, well, maybe not half the time, but enough of the time, it's either so slow or it misunderstands me, and I end up just pulling out my phone anyway. And is that just me? Is my Canadian accent making it hard for you guys to understand me?
I don't think so. You know, it depends on which voice assistant you're using and how familiar you are with them. You know, you said you don't use them very much. So, you know, as much as we don't want to admit it, you kind of have to learn how to talk to an Echo or to a Google Home. Like, you can't just say, hey, buddy, I'd like it if I did this right now. You have to say, turn on this or set the brightness to or yada, yada. But once you get the hang of it, it's not so bad.
Yeah, there are frustrating limitations. One that continues to annoy me, and I'm in the HomeKit system. One of the benefits that I really saw with HomeKit was that most of the control is done locally. And so you're not waiting for this kind of spool of, oh, okay, let's send the command or the prompt to the cloud will return the translation command of what I asked it to do, and then it goes out to the cloud to talk to the device, and then it actually does the thing where I can say, turn on the lights, and it's instant. However, there are weird kind of vernacular style things that are really dumb. So I have smart shades as well, and I can't say, hey, dingus, turn on the lights and roll up the shades. If I do two at the same time, it goes, I'm sorry, I can't do that. I have to control each thing independently, which is why for some of this stuff, and the phone thing, yeah, I could pull out my phone, but by the time I do that, I'd rather just stand up and walk 5 feet across the room and hit the button on the wall, which is why I've kind of made sure that everything that I control from my smart ecosystem can be manually controlled. But generally, as long as I agree, learn the syntax and are willing to put up with the occasional kind of it not hearing you or it not understand the command, it can generally work pretty well. I mean, our failure rate is probably 1 in 10 now that we've kind of learned how to talk to the device. It's dumb because you feel like it should just be able to know.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
I think that a lot of it is also making sure that you have things set up. Like with Siri, can you do shortcuts to, like, you said that you'd have to say, do this and this, or do this and this and this. Can you set up a shortcut and then call the shortcut from Siri?
I could. You could set up a scene. I'm lazy, so I haven't done that.
Gotcha.
One thing that I've kind of done to mostly resolve that issue, and it's a very expensive, stupid problem, so I fully admit that this is embarrassing to say on the internet, but I've bought a HomePod Mini for just about every room in my house. And what's great is that the HomePod Mini itself knows where it's located, and it also knows which one you're closest to. So I don't have to say, turn on the lights in this room. I just say, hey, turn on the lights, and it knows, okay, it's talking to this HomePod because that's the closest one to your face, and you're in this room, so let's turn on the lights in this room instead of saying, what do I turn on? Where do I go? And that saves a lot of time.
Echoes will do that too. Echoes are aware of the room. Well, as long as you say it, you tell them which room they're in and what else is in the room. You can just say, turn on the lights, and it'll get the lights for that room.
As much as it's a stupid buzzword, it kind of sounds like machine learning is the solution to pretty much every problem that we have. I mean, one of my big ones is when you use your voice to control it and your home assistant or your virtual assistant comes back to you and goes, oh, hey, I need you to validate your fingerprint or, do a facial scan or whatever. I've run into this with particularly my garage doors. They don't want to open, and I get it. It's a security thing, but they don't want to open without an additional pin or without a fingerprint or without something like that. Or, a lot of the things with Google Assistant in particular, you'll say, I'm not going to say it, obviously. I don't want to trigger everyone's phones, but, okay, G, do this. I'm sorry, you're going to have to unlock your phone. It's like, if I wanted to unlock my phone, by the time I unlocked my phone, I could have just pressed the button in the first place. So, natural communication with your home assistant, understanding from the context what you want to do or stringing together multiple things. I mean, this really does sound like stuff that could be not easily because it's an enormous challenge, but sounds like something that could be solved using machine learning and AI. One of the things that really bugs me is, when you were talking about the vernacular, like how you have to have a specific way of asking your virtual assistant to do something. That was one of the reasons that I actually ended up soldering leads onto my wall-mounted garage door opener for my Chamberlain garage door, because the way their integration with the Google Assistant worked, at least at the time, I haven't checked it recently,
It's
but the
still
way,
bad.
yeah, the way their integration worked, you had to say, okay, my assistant, tell my queue to do this to this
Yeah.
garage door. And I'm sitting here going, who in their right mind? I understand that from a branding point of view, you guys want me saying the name of your product over and over again or whatever, so that it's burned into, my gray matter inside my skull. But that's a terrible user experience. Like, can you imagine where Apple would be today if they thought, what would be great if every time the user wants to use our product, we added 3 extra clicks, just so that they can sit and appreciate our Appleness more. I mean, how can you be so short-sighted?
Well, the way that Apple, or the way that Amazon fixed that with the Echo, was adding routines. And so you can with a routine you can say whatever you want. There's no, as long as you say the invocation name, the A name at the beginning, you can say whatever you want afterwards, and then you can do whatever you want afterwards. I know, at least I've written a couple of Echo skills, and the way that it works is when you say tell my Chamberlain to, it tells the Google Assistant or the Echo to stop listening and to forward all of those intents into the skill that somebody else wrote. So Chamberlain or MyQ wrote a skill that listens for certain words, and so it just forwards that data into that part there. And I agree, it's totally ridiculous. And I think Google just released something to be able to do like a routine type thing as well. But Amazon Echo has totally fixed that problem with routines. You can invoke anything, any custom skill. You could say whatever you want. You could say, hey, cook me dinner, and it'll open your garage door and call Uber Eats or whatever.
And I don't want to be the Apple fanboy, but I got to interject something here. One of the things that really attracted me to HomeKit was that I get really excited about stuff and I start it and then I get lazy. So I was really excited about the hardware and integrating it, but the last thing I wanted to do was set up 50 different automations for, like, okay, when I say this specific thing, trigger this light and this light, but not this light,
It's
make
such a
this one
pain.
blue. Yeah, I just want it to work. And so one thing that HomeKit does that I really appreciate is that and HomeKit is limited in this regard. With the Amazon Echo stuff, you can say, like, hey, tell this window cleaning robot to engage, right? HomeKit's list of supported devices is almost frustratingly small. For
Mm-hmm.
example, robot vacuums, not supported in HomeKit. It's not a thing. They don't exist, Apple, which is dumb. Now, there are workarounds, but they're kind of inelegant through HomeBridge and Home Assistant. But one of the things that I like is that within its kind of set of, hey, these are the devices we support, you can just say, turn on this device. And if that's the only device in your room or in your house that has that function, it does it. Or you can say, hey, turn on the light in this room, without having to invoke specific, brand names or skills, or without having to go to the painstaking process of setting up automations or saying, when I say the lights in this room, I actually mean this hue bulb and this Lutron switch and this other, you know what I mean?
Well, there's a lot of things in Amazon Echo and in Google Home that function that way as well.
Yeah.
It's really only for the very specific things that need to access a cloud in order to do what they're doing. Like Chamberlain MyQ is crazy. I would never suggest it to anybody at all, ever. But the
Tell
reason
me
that
how
it has
you
to do
really
that
feel.
is because it can't discover itself locally. So Echo can actually do a lot of local discovery and a lot of local invocation of devices. But there are a certain number of things that it has to actually go to the cloud. And so if you need to say, let's say you wanted to add all of your Roborock stuff right? You wanted to add a Roborock vacuum to it or something like that. The only way that you can integrate that is by putting in your credentials for the Roborock cloud, right? And so in order for Echo to be able to do that, you have to first get the Roborock skill and then put your credentials into the Roborock skill. And then from that point on, you would think you'd have to say, ask Roborock to do this, but then it does expose some things to you, like in the form of a switch or in the form of a light or something like that, do all the basic stuff. So that functionality really is coming along and really is getting there. It's not just HomeKit that can do it. I'd like to see a lot more HomeKit-like stuff where you actually have full local APIs for everything. That you say that HomeKit has not a lot of stuff, and the reason for that is because in order to qualify to be in HomeKit, you have to expose a local set of commands that don't have to go back to the cloud.
Yep, there's not much data you can mine
now,
from that.
I've got a cool story about that, actually. But before I launch into it, if you guys are tuning in now, we're just discussing the future of home automation, which, as it turns out, has ended up involving a lot of the present day state of home automation, because a lot of what we're wanting for the future, it turns out, is derived from complaints we have about the present. Now, so I'm here with Quinn from Snazzy Labs, as well as Rob Tait from The Hookup. So you can find them both over on YouTube. Now, you guys perfectly segued into one of the next things that I wanted to talk about: cloud versus local. What is the forever solution? I think it's pretty obvious that they've both got their pros and cons. One of the pros of the cloud is that you can have, theoretically anyway, more natural voice interaction, right? It's more likely to understand the particular dialect you're speaking at it. One of the benefits of local is that there is just nothing like saying, okay, whoever it is I'm talking to, turn on this light, and boom, the light is on just like that. But at some point or another, we're going to have to make it better, because right now, you guys alluded to it before already, cloud-based services, they can be really laggy. And if they're cloud only, in some cases, they won't work at all. If for whatever reason, not if you don't have an internet connection, but even if your internet connection is a little bit unstable. One of the really frustrating ones for me is when I'm on my way into or out of my driveway, right? Which is a time you might want to use home automation. You know what I'm talking about? To maybe, I don't know, open or close a freaking garage door. That's one of the times that your network connection is most vulnerable, as you're jumping between cellular and Wi-Fi or vice versa. And it drives me absolutely crazy when I can't do something basic where I know the exact keyword I'm supposed to say, and it doesn't just freaking do it. Another really interesting situation that I think I'm going to tip my cards a little bit here. Another really interesting situation we ran into recently where cloud just was not going to be an option was for thermostats. So it turns out that with those Ecobee thermostats, you can, normally when you issue them some kind of voice command or some kind of smart home command, other than just pressing the button on it, under normal circumstances, it will have to phone home in order to make any kinds of changes. And there are huge benefits to it being cloud connected. It can get, real-time weather reports, so it knows what the ambient temperature is outside, all kinds of useful things like that. But what was driving me crazy was, hey, I don't want to delay on this stuff. Part of the reason is that it's just, you just have to kind of stand there and stare at it and see if it worked or not, which makes it not faster than going over and pressing the button. And then part of it is just that it has the potential to be unreliable. Now, fortunately, those Ecobees happen to be HomeKit compatible. And by tricking them, even though I'm not actually, I don't know if I'm going to have a single Apple device in my house, by tricking them, by putting them in HomeKit mode, and then having Home Assistant, that software that, like I had alluded to earlier on the show, allows you to take multiple various ecosystems and have them work together. By having Home Assistant talk to the Ecobee through HomeKit, we're able to get it to work instantaneously, which is super cool. So I lean pretty heavily on the side of local. I like my stuff responsive. I like it to work even if I don't have an internet connection for whatever reason. But what's your guys' pros and cons? What direction do you think we're headed?
Well, I think
I don't.
you'd be crazy not to go local. But the for HomeKit, I have one specific complaint with HomeKit, and that is uh, when you use HomeKit, you buy the device and you're like, oh, I'm going to use HomeKit because it's local, and then you set up your Ecobee. What they don't tell you is when you set it up, it's setting up both the cloud and the HomeKit. And so it's still communicating with its cloud. It might not be using it for all of the stuff, but you get this sort of false sense of security where, oh yeah, I'm all HomeKit, so everything is local. But most of the things that you set up with HomeKit, if you ever go in and log into their website or wherever, or sign up for it, it's not just HomeKit. It's using HomeKit and the cloud. And I really think that if Apple was a little bit more transparent about what they require from manufacturers in order to be HomeKit enabled, that there would be a lot less misunderstanding about it. But like for instance, in the case of the Ecobee, I know that the Ecobee only exposes a small fraction of its commands via HomeKit because it was only what the HomeKit needed, right? Or only what you could do in HomeKit versus all their cloud stuff has way more. And so the way that you integrate it with Home Assistant, whether you integrate it with HomeKit or via the cloud, changes what you can do with it pretty substantially.
What a pain in the butt.
Right.
I kind of sit on the middle in this because I agree that local control is super important. One experience I had that kind of just highlighted to me how cool local control can be is I had my internet connection down. Google Fiber accidentally cut the wrong cable when they were working on our street, and the whole street went down for like 5-6 hours. And so my local network was still up, but I didn't have any internet access. As I was walking towards the garage, I told my phone, hey, open the garage. And as soon as I thought that, I was like, oh, duh, I have no Wi-Fi. But it actually worked. And the reason why it worked is because I was connected to Wi-Fi. And what's even cooler is that either the iPhone did on-device processing, or probably more likely, it did a cellular fallback, sent my voice to the cloud, and it came back and said, hey, open the garage. And then it actuated that garage command locally, which was freaking awesome. But I also recognize that, as you guys have both stated, a lot of what makes smart devices cool inherently requires cloud connectivity or internet connection. Some of the really cool features of the Ecobee require that it be connected. And so my workaround on this has been, if it benefits me for the device to be cloud connected, I'll leave it cloud connected. If it serves no purpose, and like a garage door opener, for example, that doesn't need to talk to the cloud as far as I'm concerned, and so I don't let it. All of my devices I stick on a VLAN because security on most most cloud connected smart devices is poor at best. And there's a few that are particularly bad. So they're actually all isolated, can't talk to each other or any devices other on my home network, but my home network can talk to them. So it ends up kind of working out, but that's hardly a suggestion that I would give to a normal person.
Right.
Right.
Yeah, I think we're talking about the future of smart homes. There's two major things that need to happen. And one of them is, we were talking before, like you have to know programming. You shouldn't need to do programming to make your smart home work. And number two, if you want to be private, you shouldn't have to have, a ubiquity system with VLANs. It should just be assumed, right? Now,
I think I'm going to jump in here and give a quick explanation of what a VLAN is for some of the people who might not be familiar with that. A VLAN is a virtual local area network, and what it means is that basically all of the packets for that VLAN are tagged with an identifier so that they behave in a certain way. So normally you've got your network switch, you plug all your devices into it, and they can all see each other, so to speak. They can all send and receive data. But what Quinn was saying is that he takes devices that shouldn't be able to communicate outside. Like let's say, for example, something like a nanny cam. Quinn might say, okay, look, that does not need any access to the broader internet. So what he can do is he can put that on a VLAN where he can basically say, okay, any data being sent from a device. Actually, well, no. What he would typically do is you wouldn't put a device on the VLAN. You would. Oh man, what is the easiest way to do it? Yeah, hey,
You would
Quinn,
just firewall the whole VLAN and tell it to drop all the traffic out.
Right.
there you go.
Incoming traffic and outgoing traffic allowed. So I can still access the device. It's a unidirectional communication. So the
Yes.
devices on
Okay.
my main network can talk to the device. As far as it's concerned, everything's good. But as soon as it tries to connect to the devices on my network or outside anywhere but the greater internet, now it gets blocked.
Perfect. Okay. So basically what you're saying then is that you want to be able to send a command to that device, but it all just goes into a black hole when it goes to send it outside to the greater internet. Now, one of the cool things you can do with VLANs is you can set different kinds of permissions. So Quinn could say, okay, yeah, this one can talk locally, but not over the internet, or this one can
Right.
do neither, or whatever the case
Yep.
may be. But that is the kind of thing that it requires a managed switch. So you have to have a switch that has like an interface that, whether it's through a GUI or whether it's command line, you have to be able to configure. And it requires the know-how on the networking side of things to set that up. That's
And
not,
it is not intuitive.
no, it's really not. I mean,
If
even
only
I would
somebody
say,
made a fantastic YouTube video about it.
hey, yeah, I love it. I love it. You got to get the plugs in. So I'm really glad you brought up privacy because that was one of the topics I wanted to talk to you guys about. Moving into the future, like, what's your personal line, right? Like, something as innocuous as a thermostat. How easy would it be for, Google to utilize your Nest data and go, oh, wow, these guys really are very energy conscious. They keep their house at a pretty low temperature, and then bombard you with ads for sweaters. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Look, it's even worse. I mean, there was that story last year. There was a Chinese company that had a bunch of smart connected thermostats, and there was ransomware that got onto the thermostats, and they were changing people's temperatures up to the maximum heat level in the dead of summer until you paid them to stop doing it. So just
Well, that's
crazy
pretty bad.
stuff like that.
That's
Yeah.
pretty bad.
Yeah.
But like you said earlier that machine learning is probably going to be an answer to a lot of this, and you can't do machine learning without a ton of data, and that's the data that we're all worried about being private. So I think that it really depends. I think that first of all, you need to be aware that they're using your data. You need to consent to it, right? And companies need to tell you what they're using their data for, and if they're using it in house, if they're selling it, right?
Yeah.
So I have two things in my house that I think are really cool that I am very happy to share data about. One of them is a mattress, right? And so the mattress basically tracks your sleep state, right? So whether you're in REM or deep sleep or light sleep, and then it does adjustments of the temperature in order to push you into different stages of sleep, right? And you can bet they are collecting a ton of data because that data just doesn't exist. Who is that going to work for? What if I'm overweight? Is that going to mess with me there? Is it only for certain ethnicities that it works? They're collecting all kinds of data about sleep, right? And I'm fine with that, right? I don't think they're not manipulating my thoughts and my, voting preferences with my sleep patterns, I don't think.
Yet.
And then the other one is a workout machine. And basically it tracks everything. And it can see like my power output for lifting weights. It can see my gains. And so it's collecting data about, hey, we gave him, this exercise and he did it this many times and he did it at this rate and he saw this amount of gains, right? Again, that's data that just doesn't exist right now. And it can't exist because in order to get that amount of data, you'd have to have a ton of normal people in labs hooked up to a bunch of equipment. But now we're putting these machines in everybody's house and they've just got all this data flying in at them. And if they've got good data scientists and good machine learning, there's a lot of great stuff that could come of that. And so in that case, like, I'm not hyper private. Everything has to be locked down, but I should certainly be aware of what's being used and have a say in whether or not it's being used.
Right.
Now,
It's pretty black and white. I mean, people think it's black and white, and it's really not. I think everyone has their own threshold of what type of invasion of privacy is acceptable. For example, I don't have any cameras in my house. I don't want to be recorded. I don't want the possibility, however unlikely, for that to be accessible outside my home. And the cameras that I have on the perimeter of my home are all stored locally. I don't have any cloud connected cameras just because that's not something I'm comfortable with. But other stuff, like the same workout machine Rob has and a couple other devices, I have no issue. And people have to recognize that there's trade offs. For example, don't come rob me, but I live in a jurisdiction where unless there is visual confirmation of someone in the home, the police won't respond to a 911 request. And so if
mhm.
my alarm goes off, the alarm company says, hey, we want to put cameras in the house because otherwise the police aren't going to come if someone's in your house. And I just say, well, I don't want a camera in my house. So that in theory puts me at risk, because if I were to be robbed, it would be a problem. On the other hand, I find that trade-off is worth it as opposed to having cloud accessible cameras in my home at all times. So that's not something I'm comfortable with.
Now, we all, I think, agree that one of the big things that to make home automation truly mainstream is interoperability, right? Right now there are solutions, but let's just be honest, they are super nerdy and they're not going mainstream. It's just not going to happen. So you've got your smart assistants. You've got your Google Assistant. You've got Siri to a lesser extent. It's an assistant. I don't know if that's a smart one. You've got Alexa.
You're not
But then
wrong.
you've also got the manner of communication between devices. So you've got proprietary ones. Like, I'm not 100% sure. What does, Rob, would you know off the top of your head, what does Control 4 use?
Oh, I don't know, man. That's a good
Yeah.
question.
Yeah. So you've got your
Something super
proprietary.
proprietary that they won't tell
Something
you
made
about.
of gold. Yeah.
Yeah. And basically, ones where these companies, they develop these protocols, they develop devices, they partner with, I don't know what it's called in the home automation space, but in electronics, it's typically called a VAR, or a value added reseller, where they're basically installers, right? You don't go buy a Control 4 thermostat. You pay a consultant or an installer to come and design a system for you and install it. And then you've got the more consumer-oriented communication standards. You've got Z-Wave, which is on its seventh generation now. Zigbee, both with their pros and cons. They both use mesh-style networks, but they have differences in terms of their individual component ranges, um, their device limits, like device number limits, things like that. Now, one of the big things that the smart home community seems to be buzzing about right now is the Matter protocol. If you're not familiar as a viewer with the Matter protocol, it was co-created by this is quite the boy. Is this
Heavy
ever a list
hitters.
of companies here? What do we got here? Amazon, Apple, Google, Samsung SmartThings, and the Zigbee Alliance. So they announced the collaboration and formation of the working group of Project Connected Home over IP. So the Matter protocol is supposed to see devices start to arrive sometime in, I believe, 2022. Is this the answer with those names on board? I believe IKEA is on board now as well.
Yeah, it is. So it basically, the only reason that it's the answer is because you got a bunch of bullies, and those bunch of bullies have banded together, and they have agreed not to bully each other, and they will bully the rest of the people. If you look at Zigbee and Z-Wave specifically, Zigbee was early to join, but Z-Wave was late to join. They're in the Matter Alliance now, but only because they got bullied into it. They were going to go out of business otherwise. And the hilarious thing is Matter didn't choose Zigbee or Z-Wave for their protocol. They chose Thread.
Yeah.
Thread is a random a protocol that was developed by Nest, and it's not really in anything. It's in a very small amount of things, and it's not really any better than Zigbee. It's lower frequency, so it's on the 900 megahertz band, so it's got a little bit more range. But Z-Wave is in that frequency. It's sort of like when everybody has their own interest in something and nobody can agree over it. And so they just pick the worst
For
option because
random.
that's the one that's like the least objectionable for everybody.
Yep.
But that's where we are now with Thread. I mean, it's they're going to push it into everything they say, but it's the one that doesn't make any sense. Why didn't they pick one of these tried and true, protocols that's been around forever? It's been through 7 generations and has always worked. Why didn't they all band together behind that? And the answer is probably because then they would have had to pay Z-Wave all the licensing fees for all the devices that they were going to have. But now, since they're all in this alliance, nobody has to pay licensing fees to anybody else and yada, 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 and they can be the bullies. That sounds really pessimistic, but
I'd like to think that in the long term, not having to pay licensing fees is going to be a net win for the end user. But that doesn't change the fact that there's going to be, yet another round of that thing that smart home enthusiasts hate to see. Yet another round of needless obsolescence.
Yep.
I mean, that's a really good kind of completely separate discussion that we can kick off into here. Is I forget who alluded to it earlier, but talking about devices or compatibility for devices or even entire companies disappearing and what a threat that is for the mainstreamification of home automation.
Well, the good news about Matter is that if you put a Matter device on the market and you still have a Matter hub, even if the company that put the device on the market goes out of business, it should still be able to communicate with the Matter hub no matter what, right? No matter what.
So basically, this is kind of supposed to be the answer to, look, we understand you guys are very hesitant to buy into an ecosystem because, I love that Quinn was talking about how I believe it was HomeKit was getting better, I think was what the conversation was. Or was it Alexa that's been getting better? And maybe it was Rob talking about it. The point is, it doesn't matter. As long as it's getting better, everything's bueno. But as soon as things start to get worse, you feel like a sucker for spending so much money buying into this ecosystem. So then the idea is, even if your particular device doesn't get a firmware update anymore because the manufacturer's gone or whatever, it will still just communicate with your other Matter devices through standard API calls, for example. So every thermostat could potentially, not that it would necessarily work out this way, but could potentially use exactly the same calls for, heat up 1 degree or whatever the case may be.
Well, I actually think that is exactly what's going to happen. Matter is putting forth this set of SDKs where every person that wants to get Matter certified has to use the exact same calls. It's actually like that in Z-Wave already, where a Z-Wave device has a very limited number of calls that it can make within that Z-Wave group, and Matter is going to be equally locked down.
And I think the only reason that this has really worked out is because I mean, the smart home craze started. I mean, there's always been Control 4 and kind of these more traditional companies, but the kind of consumer home automation craze began in the early 2010s. And I think the reason there wasn't a kind of an alliance like this is everyone wanted to win. And so Google did their own thing and Apple did their own thing and Amazon kind of surprised everyone and did their own thing. And a bunch of companies tried to work to get certified with these individual companies. Some would get certified for multiple, some would get certified for none. They'd get purchased by competitors and disabled, and people kind of got boned. And that was the early adopters' poison, I suppose. And there really was no one clear winner. We just ended up with a bunch of stuff that was kind of okay. And I think that in a quest of maybe money, but also ultimately what befits and is best for the consumer is that everyone can make more money by also kind of integrating into a universal ecosystem where people can choose the platforms that they enjoy while not worrying about whether or not the devices they purchase will move forward. And I think that's really cool. And that's the first time that I think this has even looked promising. And I think it's also one of the major steps that will kind of push home automation into the mainstream, because it's been too technical and too confusing, and there have been too many horror stories of things just not working. And hopefully Matter will change that. And I think if it doesn't fix it altogether, it will at least make it better than where we are today.
I'm hoping for that too. Now, assuming it does, all right, and you can get a Matter hub that just freaking works, and you can buy Matter compatible devices. I mean, man, there's particular devices that just I look at and I go, oh man, this just makes my life so much more difficult. You know, something like a clothes dryer. You know, that's the kind of thing I expect to replace maybe 3 times total in my entire lifetime. So it becomes that, you know, that meme with the guy sweating, like which button he's going to press. Like, I feel like that trying to decide whether to get this brand of dryer or this brand of dryer, because I feel like I'm locked into this thing basically for what is an eternity in technology terms. But let's say that all goes away and everything is interoperable. My last question for you guys, I realize we're running a little bit over time here, but I'm having a ton of fun, is all these different services. I mean, if they're not going to make money licensing their protocol or whatever the case may be, they're going to want to make money on either the devices themselves, but that's going to be more competitive if everything's just interoperable. So more realistically, everyone's going to be wanting to make their money on cloud subscriptions to their devices that have some kind of value add. So, you know, whether it's functionality outside of what the Matter protocol's basic, you know, call set allows it to do, or whatever. So I want to hear from you guys. Is it worth paying for the cloud subscription, or do you stick with the basics? Like, what are your home automation cloud subscriptions? I mean, I was outraged when If This Then That all of a sudden wanted a subscription to do more than, I think it's like 2 or 3 custom
Yeah.
automations.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very
And I
low.
think they're going, well, all right, that's useless now. Guess I'll just find something else. And that's what led me to Home Assistant. So, but then Home Assistant actually has a subscription that allows for better integration of the Google Assistant that I'm probably going to end up just paying for. So what do you guys pay for? What do you refuse to pay for?
I only pay for Home Assistant. And I actually don't even use any of the things that I pay for with Home Assistant. I just pay for it because they are developing it and it's constantly getting better. And that's what I feel like with a subscription. If I'm paying a subscription for something, it shouldn't be like If, where I'm just paying to keep the lights on. I'm paying because I want it to get better and better and better and better and better. And that's what the Home Assistant guys are doing. And so I'm glad to pay my $5 a month to Navigaso. That's easy money. Because I see, you know, they're pushing out an update every month.
Yeah,
I,
I pay for nothing, frankly, myself, but I'm also a sucker because a lot of my current integration is built into the Apple ecosystem, and you pay in blood. Uh,
Yeah.
so, for example, HomeKit Secure Video is a really cool feature that allows you to have, I believe it's 30 days of recording for an unlimited number of cameras if you have an Apple One subscription plan, which is 30 bucks a month. If you don't pay for that and you only pay for a basic iCloud subscription, I believe you get 5, and the number of cameras reduces. And so while you're not directly paying for specifically cloud video storage, Apple gets you to pay another way. And
yeah,
then a lot of the benefit that I have in my system is tied to HomeKit, which is only compatible with Apple devices, which sucks. I mean, I have a Galaxy Flip 3 on the way and I'm so excited about it, but I honestly can't use an Android phone full time anymore because my house is tied into HomeKit. So, yeah.
Did you see that leaked agenda from one of Apple's like executive summits or something like that, where it was I think it was from 2010, and it's got Steve Jobs's like kind of agenda, like handwritten notes for what they were
Hmm.
going to discuss. Did you catch that?
I didn't.
I haven't seen it
Okay,
yet.
Oh, I
it's
saw
super
the
cool.
iPhone mini thing. Is that what you're talking about?
No, it
Oh,
wasn't
okay.
that. Basically, it was just kind of like they take the top, I think, 100 people or something like that. Anyway, the point is, it was super interesting because one of the things on there was how do we lock people into the ecosystem? It's something Apple does incredibly well. Like almost nobody else does it like Apple. Here it is. I found it. So this is from October 24th, 2010. And I don't know why it came out. Yeah, it doesn't actually say why in the note here. But Renee Ritchie, I don't know if you guys know Renee.
Yeah.
He put it in a chat that we're both in. And basically, it says right here, okay, business and competitive update, show Droid and RIM ads, do this, do that. trying to find it. Apple in danger of hanging on to the old paradigm for too long. We invented the digital hub concept, just like super cool stuff. Holy war with Google is one of the agenda items, which I thought was amazing. Where is it? How do we lock people in? Why can't I find this? Well, whatever. The point is, yes, here we go. So Year of the Cloud is what he called 2011. And basically there's a bullet point there that says tie all of our products together so we further lock customers into our ecosystem. That's it, verbatim, what the goal was.
It's 100% the truth.
And they've done it.
Yeah.
Sadly they have.
All right. Well, I could talk to you guys all day about this stuff. I'm having a great time. Unfortunately, this is the end of the hour. We're actually 5 minutes over time, so our poor production team is probably wants to go home or eat food or do whatever it is that they do. Guys, do you want to just do a quick plug for where people can follow you? Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, all that kind of stuff. Go for it.
So you can follow me at the Hookup1 on Twitter, and of course the Hookup on YouTube, and also on Facebook at the Hookup.
On YouTube and Facebook, you can find me at Snazzy Labs, and everywhere else you can find me at Snazzy Q.
And you guys are going to find me in our next Facebook live audio room next Friday. Our topic is going to be Linux, then, now, and the future. And I have a fantastic guest. Actually, I'm 99% sure that the guest is hold on, I'm just gonna ask. I think I have a really fantastic guest. Let me guess. I'm going to have Wendell from Level 1 Techs on. It's going to be an absolutely fantastic show, guys. Don't miss it. And that's it. That's all. I'm signing off. Until next time. Next Friday, guys. Make sure you sign up. Now let's see if I can. Yes, this one.